Welcome to another episode Out of the Blank podcast. I'm here with Thomas.
Hi, how you doing?
Thomas, tell me a little bit about yourself, man. What makes you you?
Ugh, God, that's a tough one. I suppose the superficial level would be a little bit ocean obsessed, a little bit of a weird kid. Um,
What's
decided
wait,
to
wait,
make.
wait. What's weird about being obsessed with the ocean? I'm a beach guy. Like, all right, so this is what you probably don't know about me is I live in a beach town. So we're surrounded by water. Ocean's a big part of my life. I've jet skied. I've been involved in it for so long that I couldn't think of any
See,
other
it's part
place.
of you.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, that's cool. The weird kid thing is kind of an adjacent. They're like two parallel tracks. It's like weird kid likes the ocean, and then trying to combine those two things.
It only gets weird
uh,
if you start drowning people's pets in the ocean.
Not done that. Not done that.
Okay,
No.
good. Good.
We do use bait. We tempt things with carcasses, but I've not done pets yet. We're looking to branch out though.
Hold on a second. You said yet. Be careful. No. Um, what exactly are you obsessed with about the ocean? Is it the fact that there's so much of it and we barely have any of it discovered?
It's sort of heading that way a little bit now. I can't sum it up. I grew up in the Midlands. I grew up totally landlocked, and so going to the ocean was like a special thing. It was a totally different place. Like we're from inner city, sort of Birmingham. It's this big industrial center. It's like the second biggest city in the UK. So going to anywhere coastal felt totally different. Um, but it was just like a weird obsession with fish as well. Like as a child, my like absolute best day out was my grandfather would take me on the train to see the fish at this pet shop in like inner city Birmingham. Like it's a dingy little pet shop with these sick looking fish. But no, I get to go on the train. I'm hanging out with granddad. Then I get to see fish at the end, and that was like it. That was the pinnacle.
Yeah, it's crazy because I know so many people I tried to go vegan once. That didn't work out because as soon as they were like, you can't eat seafood, you can't eat fish or anything, I'm like, "Oh, I'm out. I'm out. Because that has literally been so involved in my life. I mean, every single meal is either tuna, tilapia. Like
It's like
chicken.
cultural.
Yeah, chicken a little bit in there, but like for some people like in Tennessee, sushi is like 50, 60, 70 something dollars, like expensive night out if you're going to go out for sushi. But for me, that's our commodity. Like our hard thing to get
Yeah,
down here is barbecue. Like anything that happens to do with the red meats, the price of it is so high because we don't have that as a regular thing in our town. I mean, I live in Ocean City, Maryland. It happens to be one of the very small places that is surrounded by the ocean and the bay. But the bay is just marsh area. It used to be a giant swamp, but we had this huge flood come through that ripped apart, I guess our little peninsula, I would say, and turned it into what we call Ocean City, where you have to take two bridges to get across. And everything seafood. It's been so much a part of my life that when I talk to people, they're like, "You live at the beach." I'm like, "Yeah, I live at the beach." Like, it's just so here. It's kind of like the opposite. With you, for instance, you being landlocked, you love the water because you weren't so surrounded by it. I've been living around this water this whole entire time, but man, there are parts of it where I'm like, I could never, ever picture living in a place that I could not open up my door and smell that saltwater air. Like
yeah.
it's so filling just to I don't know, like when people say like take a nice deep breath and get that cold air in your lungs, when you smell that salt water, there's something about it that like it you feel so fresh. Like you don't feel
Yeah.
choked up, you don't feel enclosed that you would feel like in a heavy city or something. You just feel fresh.
And maybe you'll get the sort of hiss of the waves on the distance. Like you don't hear the crashing, but it just becomes this little like ambient background noise. This like,
It's funny because as you said, you don't hear the crashing. I just heard a crash of waves out my window. So
oh well,
it,
you've obviously got prime real estate. You're obviously in a good spot.
it sucks when you're trying to find a place at the age of 23. It's like, hey, everything's gonna be a couple $1,000s a month. I'm like, you know what? I'm fine. Just paying rent at a place that I live with my parents, and I'm not ashamed to admit that.
You're contributing to the household. You're a rent payer now.
That's what I'm saying, and I like to do fun stuff when nobody's home. But the ocean happens to be like because I had somebody mention to me like because fishing to me just was always like not really an interest. Even though I live here, it's like I can just go get fish, and it just seems boring to sit there. But someone put into a perspective into my head where it was like imagine you're tossing out a line into another dimension where sea creatures live. And I was like, oh my God, like think about it. Like there's imagine like we have all this land that's been discovered. But imagine if it was the opposite in another dimension where we lived in the water and then the land was the only thing that we haven't really discovered. Like we have parts of this ocean that is not even close to being discovered yet. Like I think just recently they found something in the Arctic under the ice shelf, which was like 3,000 feet down, a new species of fish. And I'm like, that's what I'm saying is we're so worried about the moon. I love space, sure, but I'm happy with discovering our oceans because there's a kraken and I know it. I have the
And it's
biggest.
our oceans. Like
That's what I'm
it's your
saying.
ocean as well. Like this is the backyard. This is that stuff we should be caring about.
What do you
We
think?
we had a big rant about the moon thing.
What do you, if I had to ask you, like, what's your, I guess, most best passion, I would say, for the ocean? Like, you do scientific observation of the waters and stuff. At least that's what I saw from on your page. What do you, why are you so passionate about it? Like, even though being landlocked for so long, is it something that you had like a certain experience?
Uh, Again, it was from such an early age. I'm not sure what it was. It's observing these animals and sort of figuring out what's going on, figuring out how they're solving problems, if that makes sense. And like really like totally getting into the animal. So we do a lot of stuff with beta landers. So basically we send cameras down into the deepest parts of the ocean and we offer a little snack and these things come along and they pose for us. They give us a selfie. Uh, and all of our knowledge of these animals previous to that they were trawled up. And deep sea stuff is fragile, it's low density, and then you get the explosive decompression, and then you pickle it in formaldehyde, and you've just got this jar with this corpse in it, and it's distorted, and it's all of those myths we have about like the deep sea animals, like oh gnashing, oh horrible, horrible creatures. It's what we do to them. They look horrible in the jars because we put them through these forces. So
Yeah.
I like to send a camera down there and just watch these guys and be like, well, what's your deal? What are you doing? And why are you different from him? And you're eating the same thing, but you do it differently. So how are you hunting? How are you a better hunter than him? And sort of like properly getting into the mindset of these animals.
It's kind of like the overall theme, I would say, is the deeper you go, the darker the creatures look. But really, it's on a concept of like we base time off of light. So we base that off the sun rising. All that deep down in the dark oceans, they don't know what that is. Like, there was a documentary on Netflix called Dino Fish, and it's where I think they found the Koh-Lankath off the coast of Africa, and that was from dynamite fishers that were throwing in dynamite into the water. Somehow found this like 60 million-year-old fish that they thought had long been extinct, but some dude came across it in a fish market. Like, that's not like these
It
other
was,
fish this
yeah,
dude's selling.
it was 1904, I think it was, and it was I think it was a woman. She was at the local museum or something like that. There's a book called Fish Caught in Time if you want to sort of read about how that sort of first came about. And now we know there's more of them. Now we know there's the Indonesian one and the African one, and I think the Indonesian one is more brown, but they're beautiful cobalt blue fish.
And,
But
and
even
they,
with that, like, oh
and I'm
sorry,
about to
go
say
ahead.
they were preserved because the fact of like it's time is it moves slower down in like the deep part of the ocean on the concept of there's no sunlight to tell you which it's the next day or something like that, so it just feels like it goes slower down there. That's why they were kind of figuring out how this fish lasted for so long. Like they long thought it had been extinct. It wasn't extinct, it was just so far down we couldn't even realize it.
It can act like a reserve, and there's a few species like that, but it has had these like hard resets. So a lot of the climate stuff we're worried about is the deep sea gets its sort of breath, essentially gets its oxygen from the sinking at the polar ice caps. So the oxygenated water sinks down there, and so there's a worry at the moment that if those are interrupted, we're no longer going to get oxygen to the deep sea. And it's happened in the past. There's been these massive extinction events where the deep sea is suffocated, and it's like a hard reset of the deep sea. That's why we have things like oil. It's stuff was dying and there wasn't the oxygen there to break it down, so it ended up being buried. And so yeah, it's had its own problems. But you're right, there's like species that are preserved down there. If you want to get into some really beautiful stuff, look at the chimeras. They're somewhere between the sharks and the bony fish, and they're only really found in the deep sea now. They used to, like Cretaceous period, like that was their time, but they're only found down there now, and they are weird. They're covered in these sensory pores, and they've got this really weird sort of Mickey Mouse like face, and they sort of swim with these big paddling undulations, and even like down to like how they're put together, like their jaws aren't properly connected to their skull. They've like got soft teeth on a rigid plate. They don't have a stomach. It goes like directly to intestine. Like they're proper ancient prototype animals that we've still got knocking around in the deep sea.
Is it so with that oxidation that's like happening a little bit less because of the polar ice caps? Is that so? Is there a possibility that there's going to be species of fish down there that we're never probably ever going to discover on the concept of like that's if you lose oxygen down there, there's nothing for these things to survive, and we have no way of being able to find them out now. So then eventually they would just vanish.
Yeah, yeah, and it's probably happening all the time. Species are probably coming in and going out of existence, without us ever knowing. We did a study last year. Um, we described a new species of amphipods. So you'll probably know them as like sandhoppers. If you move some kelp over, they all spring away.
Yeah.
I think springtail is another. So you find them right in the deepest ocean. In the Mariana Trench, we found a new species, and it already had microplastics in it. So the new species we're discovering are already human impacted. And then it's like, so what's normal for this animal? Like if somebody asks me like, oh, when does it reproduce? How much does it eat? And I don't know because we've only got one that's been impacted by us, if that makes sense. Like we don't know this animal clean. It's a really like weird concept. It's slightly frightening.
Yeah, they're still. I mean, they're discovering so much out of the ocean, which is like I don't understand. I mean, I get it. We want to go to the next planet, but I'm like, we still have something here we barely have even scratched the surface of when it comes to like the fact of like they're still uncovering what underwater pyramids and things of that sort, like ruins and stuff, perfectly adjacent cut like things that look exactly like how the pyramids do, but underwater, wondering how they got down there, considering they didn't have scuba technology back then. I'm like, but that would be from plate shifting and something falling right into the ocean. That's kind of the idea of like Atlantis, is that something just sunk underwater, and everyone has that fascination with trying to find an underwater city with Jason Momoa living down there. But I'm like, there's an actual concept of like I've talked to wreck divers who are coming across World War II ships, who are coming across all these types of things, and the biggest problem, like you were saying, when you pull stuff out of the water so quickly, half of those things like blades, swords that they find on these ships and things, when they pull them out, they immediately rust and turn into dust. So they have to be
Yeah,
very
they hit the
careful and
oxygen and just
yeah,
oof.
they have to be very careful in the process of things. And it's so fascinating to me because it is so close to us, and yet we barely have a good portion of it even discovered. Like there's just so much of it that we don't have really the technology to reach down into yet. I mean, even when it comes to like deep dives and stuff like that, you can only go a certain amount before it becomes dangerous levels and stuff like that. You only have a certain amount of oxygen. And I'm like, can we put a little bit more funding into this? Like I'm just saying, I mean, my biggest fear that I'm trying to push towards people is like a kraken. Like that's I
You
understand
just want to
giant
know what's
squids.
out there.
Giant squids are our thing. So I'm like, come on, there's got to be one mama or something that's above all of them that's going to rip apart ships. Like that's just not some fantasy idea. That has to be based somewhere.
It's difficult when you name things like that because then you get the next one up. So they found the colossal squid, which is like the upgrade from the giant squid, and that thing is more of a predator. It's bigger, it's chunkier, and it's got these like spinning hooks within the suction cups. So yeah, that thing's a predator. That's quite gnarly.
I mean, we're still discovering so much things about the things that we have discovered, such as like dolphins, for instance. Nobody told me dolphins had accents. Like dolphins, depending on where
Yeah.
their pods are from, depending on where they're located and stuff, they speak in different clicks and different things that we all consider, oh, it's like a dog's bark. It just may be a different pitch. No, these things speak in a different like frequency,
Yeah.
a different language. And the funny thing is, they're very, very smart if you look at them, but we barely understand it because they don't speak English. They don't speak something that we can understand, and they don't have opposable thumbs. We consider them kind of like lower on the intelligence scale. But I'm like, man, their brainwaves are definitely probably a lot stronger than ours. I mean, they go in packs. They're known as like bullies of the ocean and stuff like that. But I'm like, they're protecting you from sharks. If anything, if there's a pack of them, like sharks roll alone. Like everyone's seen Jaws, everyone's has the fear of being attacked by something underwater. I went to a shark museum. It kind of changed my thinking of things. But I'm like, the ocean's not something to be afraid of. And I've almost drowned in it. So I can tell you from heart, it's not something that you want to live your life in fear of. It's supposed to be respected. It's something so powerful where it seems to me like an infinite amount of sustainable energy if we consider about using water power and all these types of, using turbines to be able to collect a lot of that. But we're basing things off of old fossil fuels and stuff. Hopefully we'll get to a place where that's more safe. But you hear so many accounts of oil spills, all these things. I'm like, when I did jet skis, our biggest fear was spilling gasoline into the bay because when you spill gasoline, everyone's like, "Oh, look at the pretty little rainbow." Yeah, no, that's very bad. Like that's if somebody sees that, like people would have tricks like pour water on it or something, it'll help it sink faster. I'm
Oh,
like, that
hide
doesn't,
it.
yeah, that doesn't take out that. You can't pull that
Hmm.
back out once that gets in there. You are ruining this area. And you would see that like I remember the first time I came across a tuna, like one of the big tunas. Like I didn't even know they were in our bay, but I guess one got through and it was just the head of a tuna. So I'm pushing out a jet ski and I turn around. I'm like, because I thought piranha. I thought
Yeah.
immediately piranha. And I jump out and this is skeleton head and it's huge. And I'm like, what is it? They're like, that's a tuna. I'm like, oh my God. Like that's
Folk don't know how big tuna are. They're massive.
fascinating because they come in
Yeah.
cans. Anything that big doesn't come in a can.
Oh, they're amazing beasts. And I was even tuna, even like something we really think we've got nailed down. We're finding whole new things about them. Like they've got this really unique circulatory system where they like route the warm blood back into their muscles. So they're not quite warm blooded, but they're not as cold blooded as a regular fish. So because they've got such a fast swimming animal and they really need to be like really responsive, they essentially like maintain their internal temperature a little bit higher so they can keep, be a bit faster than their prey, be a bit faster than their predators.
You
Like,
saying that
and this
made
is
me
a fish
think of
we've eaten
like
for
the
ages.
Jason Bourne of fish now. Like I'm now looking at the freaking tunas like they're the Jason Bourne. They got this elite like their blood chain. I'm like, oh my God, like
Oh,
I,
they
I
are.
should
They're amazing.
I should eat less of it. Um, but it's just so interesting because like especially being on like a coastal town like myself, like so many places, like people don't really respect the idea of what the ocean is, and especially when it comes to the amount of information that's still left in there. I'm like trying to figure out ways to preserve it as much as possible. I know our town did like for a while was like not using straws, using like trying to reduce our risk of being more pollution into the water, but eventually they gave up because it was too hard. I'm like, there's got to be a better system where if people aren't just going to stop being assholes and throw stuff into the water when they get done with it, let's try and find a way. Like Australia, for instance, they just implemented this new net that goes over their sewage drains, so that collects a lot of their pollution from going out into the ocean. It's actually cleaning up their water heavily. But if you see the pictures of the first couple of months these things have been implemented, they're like when you have a trash bag and you just keep
Yeah.
shoving shit in it and you can't close it. That's what it looks like on the drain. And I'm like, oh my God, like you really, it puts in the grand aspect of things of how much people see what a floating lid here and there. And they're like, all right, that's nothing. That's nothing. The grand scheme of the ocean. That all really adds up. Like how many fish
Yeah.
are dying because they have something around their neck right now that's just floating at the bottom of the water because they can't move.
There's so many of us. Like the ocean just used to be infinite. Like you could get all the food you wanted and you could throw all your waste in there. And to be honest, when there wasn't that many of us, that was kind of true. Like it was so huge. But yeah, we're a force to be reckoned with now. And like you say, that's all just by putting a bag on there. All of that stuff was just flowing out into the ocean previously. I think for me, it's like I want to stop it sort of coming from us. I think plastic's an amazing like material, like in terms of like how useful it is. But I think it has to stay within the human cycle. It has to stay rotating within sort of us recycling or reusing it or changing the materials that we're using, and stopping it ever reaching the water. I get a little bit twitchy with a lot of the cleanup things. These skimmers and things like that that are going to take microplastics out of the ocean. And I like the idea. I like the sort of motivation to that. But how do you do that without getting the fish eggs, without getting the plankton, without getting the jellies in there? And it's such a huge problem, especially once it's out in the water. I worry that those are more about making us feel better. So making us, we pull a big bag out and it's just like, look how clean this is what I've done. Look how much cleaner this is, rather than actually tackling the problem. Whereas I think that's things like that pipe filter, stopping it reaching the water. And there's mad things we don't realize what we're producing, like the synthetic fibers. Like this is essentially plastic that I'm wearing right now. And you'll know from like cleaning out the lint trap in your dryer, like most of that's plastic. If you've got artificial fibers, that's already like microplastics. And that's going out in your washing machine as well. And like modern tires have a lot of plastic in them. So what I used to think was just the brake dust getting on the front wheels of your car, and you're sort of getting grubby when you're on the highway. It's a lot of that is like already microplastic because it's just scuffed off these tires. And I don't know how to tackle things like that, because that's obviously just getting carried by the wind and getting washed through drains and back out again.
I had
But
talked to a mycologist expert, which is like the study of fungi, mushrooms, and all that. And he was talking about ways that they were trying to manipulate a certain mushroom bacteria or fungus to be able to break down bacteria, which they were going to try and find a way that they could break down such oil spills that happen in the ocean without harming the water, just being able to break down some of those oils. But they didn't have enough funding to be able to produce even more research into it. So they ended up, I think that was about a year ago he mentioned that to me, and I still don't see anything on the news about that happening today, which kind of sucks, because you would think as like people that are environmentalists would be looking at that first. But I think the idea that the world kind of has is that like the way we consider empathy when it comes to animals for certain, it only lands on some animals. Like some people have a love
yeah.
for fish, like me and you, for sure. But for most of the population, they see an oil spill and they see a fish covered in oil. They're like, eh. But when they see a bird, oh my God, they'll lose
Mm.
their shit at a bird. They'll be like, oh my God, we gotta do our best to clean up the oceans. I'm like, you don't understand what's being affected. You think Finding Nemo would have had a bigger fucking impact on people? Like, come on, like the clownfish trying to find his way, find his dad. You think you would be like, look at all that, how that movie was, the people like showing you what we do when we overfish. I mean, so much fish gets thrown out, doesn't get used. It's, I mean, overhaul of fish to where we have fisheries that are just constant breeding, which I look at fisheries in two eyes. I think some fisheries are doing it right. I think, especially in the eyes of PETA, when it comes to classifications, regulation of what they're doing, being able to produce a sustainable amount without making it like marine land or what do you want to call it, Sea World, where they're basically
Mm.
torturing animals and keeping them in prison. But looking at it like we're gonna try our best to make sure that this is a humane process to be able to do, not really like give them a happy life or whatever. But they don't do it in the certain way when it comes to like science studying. If we're going to put things in nets or fisheries like that, find a way to be able to analyze them closer, better, and learn more about them, instead of like all we're doing is making them breed and breed and breed and then getting the food out of it without even really understanding what we're eating. I could tell you so many people that don't know how to skin a fish, and in my eyes it goes, if you don't know how to skin a fish, why are you eating it? You need to know where your food comes from, right? People want to know like the process of it going from market, going from the farm to their table and all this. Well, have you ever been to a chicken plant and you're eating a
Yeah.
lot of chicken? When you go to a chicken plant and you see the process of how it's being done, let me tell you something. It'll keep you off chicken for like 2 weeks, but then eventually when you start eating chicken again, like for me, I only make as much as I know I'm going to need. And people just make plates upon plates upon plates upon food, and a lot of that gets thrown out. And I look at that like that's wasteful, but it's also like this is a reason why our, industrial food, all these types of things that we're producing is so it's just spoiled. We're throwing most of it out. It's not being used in a very beneficial way. I mean, not even when a food expires, they don't give it to homeless people. They throw it to the dumpster
No.
and watch the people go pick it out of the freaking dumpster. And I'm like, we're doing
And
so
we'll
many
stop them.
things. Yeah, we're doing so many things ineffective where I'm like, all this could be fixed with just a lot of education on it. But you come across those BBC videos, man, where the guy's like, there's a pile of wubble in the middle of, and I'm like, come on, you're doing a serious documentary about all these types of things. If you need birds to lure in the people to feel bad for us spilling oil in the ocean, get someone that can sit there and show you why it's, get Bill fucking Nye, man. Everyone listens to that guy.
And the birds are eating something. Like, fair enough, clean the bird off, but they feed on the fish.
Yeah.
It's a whole system. It's a whole structure. And you're right. It sometimes makes more sense to use that charismatic sort of show animal to essentially what you're protecting is the bugs and the microbes and the stuff down at the bottom. But you can't protect, the guillemot or the attractive bird without protecting that whole ecosystem that it's in.
Yeah.
But you're right. People really vary in what they care about and what they like, and I think a lot of it is like what we're projecting. Like, I know a lot of anglers and a lot of sea anglers struggle with dogfish because they can close their eyes. It's totally weird, but basically, if you're going to club a dogfish, if you're going to keep it and eat it as food or make it into leather or something, as you're about to hit it, they brace and they close their eyes. And that little bit of recognizable emotion just breaks people. And the only reason the other fish aren't doing it is that they don't communicate in that way. They don't have eyelids. I can remember working with someone, and it was a redfish. I don't know if you've ever caught those, the sort of deeper sea fish, beautiful bright red. And because I'm really interested in communication, I could feel it vibrating, and I wanted to teach someone I was working with. I was just like, oh, feel that it's actually communicating. It's underwater, that would sound like a call. That's how they communicate. And she was like, oh, that's incredible. That's incredible. Well, what would it be saying? And like, well, it's screaming. It's dying. Like, what do you think it would be saying? But God, if we could hear that, like if the whole net came in and it's like, ah, it is Finding Nemo, like you say.
Can you imagine if
we'd
fish
feel
could
totally different.
if fish could talk and like you're about to club it and it just goes, ah, you're like, oh my God, I'm so like when you said the clubbing thing, it brought me back to a memory of when I was on a fishing boat, like when I was very little. And I was like, what is this? Like a little baseball bat. And I'm like playing with it and stuff like that. And like, that's what we use for the fish. I'm like, what? And that's when I realized, oh my God, you're clubbing a fish to death. Like that is so barbaric where I'm like looking at it like, and it's not a pretty sight. And I get it. Oh, you got to put it out of its misery. I'm like, it wouldn't be dying if you just threw it back in the water. But that's also a thing too. Like people don't realize fish can get the bends, fish can
Yeah.
experience a lot of stuff too. But you mentioned something very interesting, which is, I was listening to a podcast. I don't know if you know who Tulsi Gabbard is.
No.
Oh, because she was going to be the presidential candidate that was running out of Hawaii. But if you go to Hawaii, have you ever been?
Yes. I studied out there for a little while.
So their main thing is don't step on the coral because it destroys the coral, which eventually destroys the home for the fish, and then it starts receding back, and you start losing a lot of the natural land that is in Hawaii. When I went when I was 13 years old, I went to a place called Hanama Bay National Fishing Reserve, and the coral was probably maybe good 30 feet out from where the shore was. And then that's where you could kind of float above it and see the little like fish and everything like that. And you go snorkeling and stuff. But they are close to Japan or close to one of those countries over there, where the tourists that come over from there don't really understand the whole killing the fish process of stepping on the coral. So tourists just come over and berate the shit out of this coral. I mean, stand on it, break it, all these types of
Yeah.
things that doesn't look like big in the grand scheme of thing, but after years upon years upon years of that, it really recedes it back. So I went to Hawaii 5 years later when I was around like 16, 17 years old. Yeah, the whole Hanama Bay Fishing Reserve, it wasn't even a fishing reserve anymore. It was literally like there were two fish. Like I saw more fish in a small part of the local area of Hawaii that locals were trying to keep it hidden away from tourists because of the fact of all these people stepping on it after years upon years upon years. The coral had receded about a mile back. So I had to swim way out there. I'm like, that's too much of a haul to
Wow.
go
Just
see a
within
couple of
like your own
fish.
life, within 3 years.
Well, and then when I was listening to Tulsi Gabbard talk, she talked about during this pandemic, a really big benefit was when she went back home after being knocked out of the race for the election, she spent a lot of her time surfing. And it was crazy to see that in 10 months, so much of the coral grew back, so much of the fish came back, and so much of I'm like, that really sucks that our economy had to go through a fucking pandemic for that to be able to happen. But it really shows about things like that too, especially in Venice, for instance, when this pandemic was like
Yeah.
everybody was going first on lockdown. Dolphins were coming back. Things part of the water was
And
starting
it
to
was
turn back to.
clean.
That's what I'm saying is like if we spent more time like that should have woken people up to the damage that you're kind of doing to the ocean. But the issue is it's for a lot of people, they're only on it for a short amount of time and then they're not on it anymore. But it's like if you see an oil spill happen on TV and you're not near the ocean, you don't really understand what that life is. It doesn't mean anything to you. But if I took that oil that spilled all in the ocean where those fish homes were and I dumped it all over your house, you wouldn't be too fucking happy.
It's difficult, but I think a lot of stuff, like once we've got through this, once we've come out the other side of what's been a really crazy year, there's going to be so many studies based on exactly what you're describing. Like it's an experiment you could never run. Like what if we just calmed down a bit as humanity for a bit? How quickly do these things bounce back? Is it effective? And you don't want to exclude people from it. Like I suppose even somebody careful is going to have a little bit of an impact. Like there's going to be a little bit of harm done by you being there rather than not being there. But if these people have been like changed by seeing coral and like it's affected them personally, and then they'll go home and they'll learn a bit more about coral, and then they'll realize like, oh, actually it's in trouble, and oh, I probably shouldn't have stood on it, that's probably not okay. And it's me trying to be optimistic, but it might be a little ripple thing. It might spread out from there, and somebody who maybe never would have usually seen the ocean or interacted with the ocean now has this emotional experience, and that leads to something else.
Yeah, I mean, I've had an experience when I was swimming or snorkeling, I would say in Hawaii, like looking down and seeing all these wonderful fish that are just swimming around, like living in this coral. The only scary part was when I saw an eel. I was like, fuck that.
Mm.
Cause where I was at, there's this thing called the wall, which is like a lot of the locals run and jump off of it. You have to time it perfectly when the wave comes, or you'll hit right on the coral because it's about a foot below the water. So you're basically jumping off like a 15-foot drop into a foot of water where there's just coral right there. So you have to make sure your feet are up or everything. But you got to time a wave perfectly. Remember the first time I went, my cousins live out there. So my cousin's my age. He goes, hey man, like on the count of three, we'll just run and jump off. And I'm like, all right, if you're doing it, I'm doing it. And then I figured he'd be like everybody where I live, where it was like they go to the edge, run, stop, and then watch you jump. So that's what I did to him. And he jumped. He was like, why didn't you jump? And I was like, I was too scared. So then I came back and the whole entire, like, what is it, 5 years later, I'm thinking the whole time on the flight, the 12-hour flight there, I'm like, I'm going to fucking do it. I'm going to do it this time. That's all.
This year's my year.
As soon as I land, I'm going to the hotel and then to that beach. I did. I went all the way to the hotel. As soon as we got in there, threw my bags in, didn't even, just went right to the beach. Did it. I literally just walked, didn't even time a wave, just ran and jumped right off. I just said, no, because I'm never going to do it if I didn't do it. But when I did that, first of all, that guilt trip, oh my god, that was, I felt like my shoulders were relieved, I would say. But when I was swimming in the water over there and even like just being so excited, like, yeah, I finally did it, I got to look and see like, oh my god, like there's beautiful parts to this, things that people don't really understand, like why they're very, very cautious about people standing on it and all these types of sorts, is because it's beautiful. It is something that when you see it, you start to have a, it's like going to a chicken plant and not saying that's beautiful, but seeing that horrible act that
That
scars you for
impact.
life. This was something that scars you in a good way, in the aspect of like, you notice this is another thing of life. This is a home for a parallel dimension where fucking sea creatures live. That literally changes your aspect of everything that happens to do with how you look at fish, how you eat fish, how you treat your waters. You know, like, I mean, in my town alone, I've been hit by a fucking saw. I've been hit by a sprinkler, all in the ocean, all in the ocean. Like, I don't get how that even filters in there, how it even gets in there. I have no freaking clue. But it's just, you see so many people here that spend their whole entire life on the water, have such a respect for it, and then the people that come here that have never seen it before consider it their vacation week, throw cigarettes in there and all this stuff. And
Mm.
our town tries our best, but it is something where you start to look at, like, just because it's not a part of your world, people don't care about it. And I'm like, you should care about it, because much like you said, it's something we all have. You know, it's the ocean. It's something I can have, you can have. It's nobody's claimed land. It's everybody's. The same thing why, like, on my Instagram, I post up sunset photos, because even though you're not seeing that moment I took, it's a sunset that happened while you were alive, which makes it something that's a part of you as well. So it's something that we can all share and revel in. And that's the same thing with the ocean.
I like that. That's a good way of thinking of it.
I got deep, deep like the deep blue sea.
Well, I think we need to tap into the like emotional element to it as well. There's nothing particularly unscientific about being moved by these things and these places, and I think it's incredibly useful as well. Like it's like you say, if those people who just treated your hometown like a holiday resort, basically, like I'm on holiday and all of this is mine and I can do what I like with it, you know, they're really missing out on a chance to have their mind changed.
So it'd be easier if fish had eyebrows, because I guess that's what people consider like emotional connection to something, is when they have eyebrows. I think that is really the thing with fish, though. I look at them, I'm like, if you just had a pair of nice eyebrows, I'm telling you, like, I would
Yeah,
love
just
you
to
so much
raise an
more.
eyebrow as you pull them out the sea, just to
Yeah.
like, come on now.
But like you said with the dogfish, for instance, like when they close their eyes, that feeling that it knows that it's about to be hit like that, it's like that's enough to get people to hesitate and stop. But most fish don't do that. They're flopping over and over again. You're like, I'm gonna
Yeah,
club this and that. And then when people see a shark, they freak out. I'm like, you're in their home. Like, I'd be pissed
Yeah,
too. Like, I've come across a hammerhead. I've seen it about 5 feet away from my
very
jet
cool.
ski before. Let me tell you something. Nothing makes you shit your pants faster than seeing a live hammerhead. Like, I was sitting on this jet ski and I was like seeing this boat come by and all these people were taking photos. And I'm like, oh, hey, I'm doing a little bit of modeling, flexing, doing my thing. And I look by and I see this hammerhead shark and it's in our riding area. And I'm like, oh my God. And I get a call on the radio and I answer the radio call and they're like, be careful, make sure no renters fall off the jet ski or get near the shark because the shark, what happens is in the bay where we do our riding area, our jet skis, it's shallower. So that's where these sharks come in to have their babies and then they go right back out to the ocean again. So it was a big thing to make sure we didn't stay near it. We didn't interfere with it, but people track them off the coast of our town all the time because they somehow slip into the bay. The bay's only waist deep. So you can see a fucking hammerhead when it's waist deep water. Like you're not like that's not a person wearing a fin. That's a shark that's head is named after a tool you would find at Home Depot. Like,
And it's a beautiful silhouette when you can see it from above
whoo,
in
let me tell you something.
waist deep water.
When you're looking at that thing, nothing drops in your freaking heart. It's like when if you fall off of a like if you ever been on a water slide that goes like a straight drop,
You get
dude.
the little
When your heart goes into your chest, like into your throat or whatever, oh my God, that's like that. When I saw that, I was like, that's a shark. And yeah, I got to watch 15 people and make sure nobody flies off their jet ski into the water. So it's like, it's a big weight on your shoulders, but it's an aspect of like, when you see something like that, like most of my memories I could recount you back with would be sunset, sunrise, on my jet ski. I mean, just watching the oranges in the morning when the sun's rising, and then seeing the nice reds as in like a cool color as the sun's setting. I mean, every ride back to the point like I would be like look over, see ponies on the beach while I'm driving my jet ski, and the sunset just coming down. I mean, moments that were
all
so
in golden light. And
even though I don't ever want to get into the water again, I love it so much where I would never trade those memories back for anything.
is it still enough out there? Do you get the green flash? Have you ever seen that?
What you would see in Hawaii, not here.
Oh, okay, okay. I offshore, I've managed to see it a couple of times, and it feels like such an alien thing.
I
It's such a strange thing to see,
I waited for that when I went to Hawaii, and
like really
then
hurting your eyes,
yeah, like
staring at a sunset.
and that's what screwed me over was because I had to close my eyes like that after like a minute of like just keeping them open for that time window, and it didn't happen. And then I shut my eyes and I went like this to rub them, and I missed it. And I was like, "Are you shitting me? Like nobody got it on video or anything?" I mean, you could look up videos for sure on it, but like, it was one of those things. Like everyone says, you have to see it to believe it. I'm like, all right, I guess I got to go back and go see that myself. I mean,
Gotta
the
go
fact,
wreck my eyes,
what
because they also tell you don't look directly at the sun.
yeah, don't be careful. You're gonna start seeing spots for a while.
Yeah.
What would you say is a mystery that you found about the ocean that you're curious about?
Oh, the thing I'm into at the moment is seeing the deep sea fish on their own terms, if that makes sense. So, like, again, a lot of people say that they're like ugly and creepy looking and things like that, but that's when we take a camera and take lights down there and shine it on them. Like that's not how they appear to each other. They appear to each other with bioluminescence and with these light shows and things like that. So even though we're saying they're ugly, maybe that's like skinning us and then saying like, oh, look, that's gross. And it's like, well, of course it's gross. You're not looking at it as it's meant to be seen. So I want to getting into the head of these animals basically, and trying to see them and experience the world how they experience the world. Like loads of them sing, loads of them make noise, and we don't know anything about that. And scent and pheromones and things like that play a huge part as well. How else are you going to find each other when you're in like kilometers of cubic water or away from each other? You might go years without seeing another one of your species, and scent plays a huge part in that. So I'm really interested in that as well, like for communication, like not just predator prey kind of stuff like the lures on a anglerfish, but like communication, how they're actually relaying that stuff.
Yeah, I learned something about how you see all those fish that swim in like those giant groups that are weaving in and out of each other. Like you see it on Finding Nemo with they make like an arrow pointer or something like
Yeah.
that. They make like all these. Well, I was wondering like they're moving in and out all the time. I'm like, it's because they're in a giant group, but it turns out they're all fighting for the center. They're all trying to fight in the center because any fish that gets on the outside usually gets picked off, I would say, by another fish. So I'm like, wow, it
Yeah,
turns out they're all weaving in and out of each other, pushing each other in and out, all fighting for the middle spot. And then they all constantly keep rotating. Some you go fight for the middle, next thing you know, you get pushed out to the side, and that's what gets picked off by another fish. So they're all really not trying to stay together as a group. They're really just trying to fight for not being on the outside. And once I learned that, I was like, holy shit, like what else is there to learn about the ocean? Like the idea, like you're saying, like messaging and songs that are being able to be sung, pheromones, all these different things. There's a wood bug that looks exactly like a stick. I mean, 100% camouflaged in, looks like a stick. They have the same type of fish, just like that just sit at the bottom sand, have their eyes shut, and you could never even know they were there until
yeah,
they open up their eyes. You're like, that's a fish. And you're like, yes. Same thing with an eel. When I was swimming through the coral, this eel blended in perfectly with this coral. And then my as you're swimming back, like I said, when you jump off the wall, there's that foot. So you have about this much between your stomach, like a couple of inches between your stomach and the coral. Now imagine an eel is in that coral and looks up at you like that. I'm like, oh my God. First thing I thought was he's gonna bite my dick off. My cousin's like, you gotta make sure when you're going with the waves that you go in when it's high tide because you'll have more room. You'll have more room for your stomach, so you're not gonna, scrape against one of the coral rocks or something.
this
Well,
whole idea sounds terrible.
I went
Like,
in on low
this is
tide.
terrifying.
I went in on low. It was terrifying, but it was fun. I went in on low
Is
tide, and
this
I
like
was
a rite of passage? This is like a
it
you've got to
felt
say
good,
you've
dude.
done
I
it.
feel like a man. I'm not gonna lie. But I was going in on low tide, and this eel was right there, and I was like, "Oh my god!" I could see him like right under my stomach, and I was like, "Oh, this wave just goes down. He's gonna bite me right in my stomach, just out of a sign of defense. You know what happens?" And it went back into his hole. I ended up swimming over the thing, but there were sea urchins. There were all these things that get sharp, that get poked right into you and stuff, and experience pain. But like, still, even I look back at those, I'm like, as much as I might have been scared in that situation, it was freaking beautiful, man. Like it was just an experience in itself where I'm like, anybody that wants to go and really experience what our oceans can be, can do. If you can see what that looks like, why wouldn't you want to protect that and make that last for generations? People always talk about, well, if that species dies, we'll always find a way to clone it. I'm like, no, you're not going to love a clone the same as the original species. Like, I don't want to get to a point where that's a normal thing where we can just say, well, if it dies, we clone it. I'm like, no, no, no. I want to try our best to figure out why did we kill that off and let's try and preserve it. Like, that's
When
people's,
you look at the cost of cloning it versus the cost of just
yeah.
not killing it.
Yeah, I'm like, it's not that hard to implement some ways to try and make our oceans a little bit cleaner and better. You know what I mean? No, don't throw your cigarette butts in. It's a simple start, but it goes even farther from there. I mean, research should be funding and trying to figure out, first of all, what is the bloop? The fact that there's a noise that the ocean makes that no one can understand what the hell that is. And I'm like, that's gotta be something. Can we work on that? I mean, Mars can wait, right? Come on, we don't need to go to the next planet so fast. People are like, there's water on the moon. I'm like, there's water on fucking Earth. And guess what? We don't even have that discovered yet. So slow your
they
roll.
they all look like wrecked Earth. It's just like, oh look, there's traces of water on Mars and there's hardly any atmosphere, but there is a bit of atmosphere. It's like, yeah, there's loads here. And that's sort of going to waste. And then it's just like, look at this fixer upper. It's like, why don't you stop busting this?
It's funny because they go, what is it? They say, well, I want to know space because of aliens. And I'm like, I'm with you on that boat. But I just want to know if they're here. And they did release that there are unidentified flying objects that we have encountered. And I'm like, okay. So it'd be stupid to think you're the only one alone in this whole entire universe or galaxy or solar system. There has to be other life somewhere. But if there are aliens, in the movie Signs, they were afraid of water. Can we discover more about the water so we can use that as a weapon? I'm just saying.
I, unfortunately, the chances are they're probably aquatic. We're probably safer being terrestrial, being land animals, than we are in meeting aliens that are, yeah, most likely aquatic. Signs. I watched it. This is a total tangent, but that film fascinated me. Somebody said to properly appreciate that film, look at it as the religious side of it, and they're demons. And suddenly, like, the whole plot shifted to being like, I'm not sure about that as an alien film, to like, oh no, like the prophecy and his journey and the arc. And if you look at them as demons being slain by holy water, which when they're aliens, it was just like, oh come on, they would have known there's water on the planet. Yeah, suddenly the film flips, and I'm just like, oh, this is like a demonic sort of faith-based film rather than an alien film, and I like enjoyed it a second time because of that. I know that's a total tangent, but I really
Well, I
enjoyed
mean,
it.
I looked at it differently when I guess recently I did a podcast like last year about it with my buddy who does a movie podcast, and we that was a movie that was very inspirational into my life just because I saw it all the time when I was a kid. It was like a family movie for me, but I didn't truly understand it until I got older. Back when I understood as a kid, I was like, oh, it's aliens. They got to run away from aliens. But then I understood the family value, like when they have that last meal together, and it's that sign of like you get to see the father break down, start crying, hold his kids and everything like that. And it was like this overall fear and aspect of not being able to protect. And I was like, you
Mm,
really start to appreciate things when you take a second look at it from like a different perspective of stuff. But even when it comes to aliens, for instance, like the one theory is like, why haven't aliens, like, why are they showing up now? Why is it this idea that we're seeing stuff about more aliens and aliens now in today's culture? And it's like, if they're making an appearance, it's the idea is like, would they be here to make us better? Would they be here to help us? Would they be here to fight us? That's always the thoughts that go through somebody's head. And I go, if anything, they're looking at this planet like something they need to save, and we're something that's severely hurting it. Because as much as I say I'm not an environmentalist, I do fight a little bit for the environment because it's just so a part of my everyday life. I walk out and there's the ocean, there's trees, there's all these things that a lot of people don't really get to see because they live in a city. And I'm like, we're you're doing irreparable damage. That's kind of the factor of why people are so infatuated with space, not only discovering a new planet, but being able to live on it as well. And I'm like, take care of the one you got, because then
mm.
if you destroy this one, it's just gonna go to the next one, destroy that one, then go to the next one. It's gonna be a never-ending process of trying to figure out what's the next home. And I'm like, there's so much here that's left to be uncovered. I mean, cryptozoology, the whole reason that's a thing is because there's 9.2 million or 9.2 million or 9.2, yeah, 9.2 million species still left undiscovered on Earth, and thousands of species being discovered like I think like every year or something like that. And that's just varieties, like an insect that has a different wing pattern could be a new species or something like that. But I'm like, there's so much more, like 6.4, think million that's still left undiscovered in the ocean. I'm like, why wouldn't you want to try and find out what that is? What information does the ocean hold? The Mariana Trench, deep parts that we haven't been able to discover yet. Like, I don't want to come across a megalodon or anything, but at the same time, I'd like to know if one existed so I know never to dip my toes in the water again.
Well, no, the species thing, it gets weird. And to be honest, cataloging stuff is only step one. You need to know what it does and if there's anything sort of unusual about it. But like when you actually work at describing new species, when you actually are trying to give something its new scientific name, like you'd think it would be black and white, but you're working so close to that edge, you realize how gray it is. Like a great example is that again these amphipods. Um, there is a species that's found all around the planet, or most of the way around the planet. And if you look at any one point, there's slight differences, but they're little breeding populations, and it's one species until you get to the other end. And if you found that one, and if you found that one, you would say they're two different species. But there's a complete continuum around the planet in between, with each little packet breeding with the ones next door, but they're so far apart, they've drifted so far that if you looked at the ends, they're two separate species. So how do you classify that? Like, what does that count as one or two? Like, it gets really, really difficult. And to be honest, there's so much stuff out there, such a wealth of life. The easiest way currently to find a new species is to go to a natural history museum, and they'll have shelves and shelves of things that no one's had the time to give a proper scientific description to, and it will say on the jar like new species, possible new genus, question mark. And that's like a big deal. And then you realize it's like from the 1920s, from the big Challenger expeditions and things like that. And you're like, no one's got round to this yet. Like it's just massively underfunded basically.
Do you think that's the perspective of like how people think of like what's going to get them into the books? I mean, the idea objective, I would say, would be fame. Like everyone loves fame. Everybody wants to be famous. Everybody wants to get their name on a Nobel Prize or something like that. But like the idea to get there now is by discovering a new planet like Elon Musk, or discovering some type of new app or technology, or being the next Post Malone. Nobody's looking at like trying to discover a fish species. And I'm like, fuck, dude, I would love to name my own disease. Like, I would love to have something like they told me Robbie Titus or something. I'm like, fuck yeah. Like, yeah. It's horrible, but yeah, it's awesome. It's got my name on it. Like same thing with
Yeah,
the
you have to
fish
get it,
species.
unfortunately, with them.
It might not be
I
something that gets you into like the cosmopolitan magazines or something like that, but it's something where it's like you found a species that no one had a name for, no one had a description for, and you discovered it, you get to name it. Like that's badass. Like, come on.
it's yeah, but you're right. We were lucky in that sort of the one that we described was still turns out to be the world's deepest fish. So that's my little like claim to fame. So the Mariana snellfish, we were on the expedition that discovered that, and I was part of the team that went on to give it its scientific name. And that's quite cool, and like it gets covered in the press a little bit. But I read in my work, I read the descriptions by people from like the 1800s and things like that. And the only thing that sort of I really enjoy about it is like 200, 300 years time, someone's going to look at my name after this species. And that's like a little glimpse of immortality. That's something I've like contributed to the sum total of human knowledge. And I'll be long dead and they won't know anything about me, but they'll just see that little name next to it. And the weird thing when you describe a species is you get called like the authority. It's quite cool. It's like, oh, you get to say you're the authority on this species, but it basically means that you're the best person at spotting it from other ones. But that's always put after the name in scientific writing. So yeah, like I say, 300 years, long, long dead. Anyone talking about the Mariana snellfish is going to have like my little name after it. And that, I love that.
That it's basically like all these people that like name a star after somebody. It's that times like a billion. Like yeah, that's
Yeah.
what it is basically. Like people get excited like I'm now a lord because I own a small land in Scotland that I'm never going to be able to visit. That might just
Yes.
be false promises. This is the same thing of getting like finding a mineral or naming something after yourself. Like it, it's
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 legacy. We want to
it's
live forever.
exactly, but I don't like the idea of immortality when it comes to being the same person living for like thousands, like Dracula style. No, 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 no. I'd rather live on through like I think everyone wants to leave a mark somewhere, and that's kind of the importance of it. Is depending on what the mark means to you. You know, like I consider like if you're left in a history book discovering a species, even if it's something that nobody really ever takes the time to research unless they go and like dig out for that specific one, it's still there. It's still you. That's yours. I hold that as high up as discovering a new element that saves the world. I don't give a shit. They're all mean the same to me because they literally it's whatever it means to you. And having something named after you, having a discovery of something that nobody has ever known before, even if you weren't there, even if that shit shuttle or whatever it is, that trip you guys took didn't happen, that species might still left undiscovered until who knows into the future might never ever have been discovered. There's going to be life long after we're gone, long after the human race is probably gone, that's never going to be discovered probably. There's probably stuff in the past that we have no idea even existed on the concept of
Yep.
it as it existed back then and it's not here anymore because of how everything has progressed, whether it was us that brought them to the point of extinction or whether it was something else. There's probably billions of things out there that just don't exist, from organisms, little microorganisms that we don't even know. I want to know
And
as
they're
much as
blinking in
possible.
and out of existence constantly. Like a new species, multiple new species have probably appeared as we're having this conversation and then died. And like there's only one generation and we'll never even know about them. Like the edges of life are so blurry and they don't fit in our human boxes. It's a continuum. It's this blurry mess, and then we're desperately trying to categorize things and give things names. And so just so we can talk about them, the only point of giving something a name is so that I can talk to you about it and we know we're talking about the same thing. Like the natural world doesn't care. The natural world totally blurs all those lines.
Yeah, and I think this is what the importance of like when I came across your page was I was like, this is something that a lot of people don't understand how much this does influence into their life. I mean, the ocean, like I said, is something that we all have. And we don't notice that because you know what's even more important to people is that Versace or is that Gucci? Like, what are you wearing? Like, that's the idea that goes into our head when it really should be like prime stuff like this. I mean, you don't need to be a sea lover to enjoy the sea. You don't need to be all these other types of, number one hit mogul on Instagram or number one whatever on Twitter. No, but this is something we can all share and revel in. And it's never, never, never too late to have a little bit of information on something like that, especially how fascinating it can be. You got to do it in a fun way to make sure you can suck in the people like a good old Bill Nye. But the same concept of it's important because marine biology, whatever you want to say, is something that a lot of people like to say, what do you get your PhD in? The first thing that comes to their minds, like astrophysics or something that happens to do with space or something that's really popular in today's time. Well, I want to talk to the person that's looking through the oceans and trying to figure out what's in there. I think cryptozoology is fascinating. A person that has their PhD in that, on the aspect of it's about discovering life. Instead of finding it on another planet, why don't you find it on the one that we've lived on for thousands of years and still barely even have scratched the surface of what's down inside of it?
And even, yeah, like you say, even categorizing it is just step one. Like, how do they interact? How do they work? Why are they living here and not there? And a big question I get asked a lot is like, oh well, what's the point of it? And that's something we're trying to push back against, because the idea is that like the deep sea is something separate, it's this whole other thing, uh, and there's not a line there. The line is human, and to be honest, the line is there because it's so expensive, and so the science and the equipment and everything is done in a different way. But it's all one big continuum. Like Challenger Deep, Mariana Trench, oh, that's really remote. It's no, Guam is right there. Like with there's trash in it. We're finding litter in it. It's it's right next to people. And if it was a horizontal distance, we wouldn't care about it at all. But it's our deep sea just as much as anything else. Like this is a deep sea planet. We only have land because some of the parts are so deep that it's pushing them out of the water. Like the average depth of the ocean is over 4,000 meters. Like it's a deep sea planet, and it's just as much a part of it and just as much a part of us as any other part. So we really want people to think about like the deep sea and the deep trenches the same way, with the same fondness and the same like personal connection as their favorite beach. Yeah, and it should feel like that. Like you'll drive 10 kilometers to go to a really nice beach, and that's all the depth is for some of the deepest places on Earth. It's just in a different direction, and lots changes with that, but it's still just as close to you. It's still just a bigger part of your life, and you can claim ownership over that and have a say in what's done with it.
Ah, see, and then you say that, and then my mind immediately thinks of Deep Blue Sea, where they have sharks that they're modifying to be smart as shit and kill everybody in like a massacre.
That was See, now that's bad. That's bad labeling, because the sea did nothing there, and the deep sea did nothing either. But you shouldn't make sharks too smart.
I'm saying it's like, why would you pick the deadliest killer to make smart? Like, oh my god, can we look at killer whales? There's a reason why they're called killer whales because they kill whales. But it's not bad though, I guess you would say.
Yeah.
Whales weigh 175 tons, can weigh up to 175 tons. I read that and I was like, Jesus, like the average person hopefully weighs under 200.
You can swim through a blue whale's heart. You could climb through it.
Oh my God. Just think of that. Like those are all right. That's something I did not know. You could swim through a whale's heart. Can you imagine if they made a water park out of a whale?
Just pump you through it.
There's a song that goes with that, but I know YouTube will cancel me if I say that, so I'm not going to.
We're trying to keep this PG. We're trying to keep this.
Well, Thomas, you've given me enough for your time, man. Where can people find your podcast? Where can people find the? Is it just the Twitter page? You have an Instagram as well.
We have sort of Twitter, Instagram. I'm just trying to sort of get the world out there. So we're the Deep Sea Podcast. We try and be slightly fun with it and poke a bit of fun at the cliches. But we've had some amazing guests. We had James Cameron on the last time. We've
Avatar?
Had the Prince. Yeah.
Oh,
Oh, and he shared spoilers. Well, not officially spoilers, but he confessed that the crab suit that's in Avatar is actually something he really wants to build for his deep sea exploration.
you should have asked him why did he create a movie that caused a mass amount of depression in people.
It was a blow, wasn't it? Like it hit me, because I am a tree hugging hippie, so that the sort of message hit me hard.
There's a lot
yeah,
of people that experience severe depression from that movie, and I was like, that's awesome that the fact that it made people look at like the world and how we've kind of changed it. Like that's what happens when we go to a new planet.
Yeah, that sort of exploitation. It's probably bad if we find a new place. The big argument at the moment is deep sea mining, is whether we should mine the deep sea, and I'm honestly torn about it, because I should be like total, yeah, like I say, I'm a hippie and I'm a deep sea scientist, so I should be totally about protecting it. But like, these materials might be important to drive the sort of green revolution and the electronics we'll need, and the places where we get these things at the moment certainly are shady with like human rights issues and pollution, things like that. So it's just a massive, massive issue. And to be honest, if you're sure about anything, you've probably not looked into it deep enough, because everything is more complex than it looks on the surface, and everything is worth finding out a bit more. But yeah, I'm stumped on that one.
It's kind of like the scenario of like chopping off a foot to save a leg.
Yeah, yeah, it's there's no right answer. You've got to do the least bad answer.
Yeah.
And yeah. So yeah, I'm that's what's stressing me at the moment. But yeah, we're the Deep Sea Podcast. We should turn up fairly easily in your search engines, and we're on Twitter and Facebook and all the usual pages.
I'll make sure I
It'd be
link it
great
all
to.
in link it all in the description, man.
Oh, that'd be lovely. That'd be lovely. People seem to be really enjoying it, but we're fairly new, so we've not had a great deal of growth. So yeah, share a link. That'd be wonderful. Thank you.
And thank you for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank podcast.